We are now onto the final two bosses of Naxxramas, Sapphiron and Kel'Thuzad. Week 1 Sapphiron, particularly on the Horde side, is the hardest fight in all of Classic Vanilla. Let's get into it. First off, Frost Resistance. We are aiming for our DPS players to have 100 Frost Resistance unbuffed for Week 1, with ultimately bringing more, around 150 unbuffed with Epic FR in latter weeks. You can include Juju Chill as part of your unbuffed total count. There are way bigger brains than me when it comes to Frost Resistance, so I won't harp on the specific details here. The raid leader of my Classic Air group came out with a review of items to go after for Week 1 Sapphiron on Anniversary, so I will link his video below in the description. Go ahead and take a look at this regarding items that you can prioritize for Week 1. Otherwise, the plan is long-term, just build up your Epic FR sets. Those will be excellent to have. Daybreak will be bringing 16 to 17 healers for Week 1 Sapphiron. This will be a slower kill, but it's necessary for the group to have enough healers to live through Sapphiron's Frost Aura, which continually puts out frost damage to the raid. A couple tidbits on responsibilities. Mages and Druids, your primary responsibility will be decursing the raid. Quick decurses. The main tank will wear their beefy mitigation set and not wear any FR. Healers will need a major mana pot and Dark Rune early into the fight. Get these on cooldown and pop them whenever they're off cooldown. You will not be popping Frost Potions during the encounter, only a Greater Shadow and a Greater Frost that you will pre-pop before we initiate the fight. Okay, let's start with the pull and positioning. We will have the entire raid focus on the left-hand side of the room. There are groups that will split up their raid, half on the left, half on the right, and while this is helpful for both spreading on air phase and having more room to bait Blizzard so it hits less players, it also introduces RNG where all the ice blocks in phase 2 could be on one side of the raid. If this were to happen, you essentially lose 30 to 50% of your raid, and it's a wipe. We won't leave the Week 1 kill up to RNG. Prior to starting the pull, we will have pre-popped a Greater Frost Protection Potion and a Greater Shadow Protection Potion. Mages will be applying Amplify Magic to the entire raid, which will increase the healing received. There are two phases to Sapphiron that are repeated until the dragon goes down. A ground phase and an air phase. Let's start with the pull and the ground phase. When we initiate the pull, the main tank needs to be closest to the boss. Due to the MT wearing a beefier set, DPS needs to make sure not to pull threat off the pull here. Sapphiron has a wide frontal cleave, so if a DPS pulls threat and he cleaves the melee, it's GG. I highly recommend the tank popping a Sapper on the pull. As a tank builds threat, he will start by dual wielding. With everyone having a GFPP popped, raid healers will make sure to focus the tank initially. After the first couple ticks, when the GFPP falls off, then you can begin to focus the raid. Sapphiron will periodically put a Drain Life Curse on the raid members. This deals nasty shadow damage to players and heals Sapphiron. Mages and Druids, you need to be quick to decurse. Sapphiron will periodically throw out Moving Blizzards on the raid. This can be deadly if you take more than a tick of damage. Move out of the blizzard and be ready to hit your Greater Frost pot if you're taking too much damage and you're low. Sapphiron will then take flight and start the air phase. In this phase, damage becomes all the trickier on the raid, as she will put 5 Ice Bolts on players that do a big chunk of frost damage. The Ice Bolt acts as a protection for line of sight from Sapphiron's one-shot mechanic of Frost Breath. If a player is not behind an Ice Bolt blocked player when the Frost Breath hits, they will be one-shot, unless you Petri or if you're a Paladin and you can bubble. What makes the air phase particularly difficult for Horde is that the Ice Bolt does splash damage to players around the individual that is hit. Think Onyxia's fireballs in her air phase. So the entire raid needs to be spread out on the air phase, like 10 yards apart to not take the splash damage. Blizzards will continue to spawn on top of the raid, in which you'll need to avoid. Players far away from Ice Bolt targets, after 4 have gone out, will cheat towards the ice blocks. After the 5th block, all players will look to hide behind one of the 5 blocks, out of line of sight of the impending Frost Breath. If there is an ice block that is close to melee on Sapphiron, you need to make sure to hit escape and not quote-unquote hit through the ice block. This will make you vulnerable to the one-shot mechanic. With Horde relying on Shaman Chain Heal for party healing, players might not be close enough during air phase to take full advantage of Chain Heal. This, paired with the potential to outrange Frost Resistance totems and the lack of Epic FR gear, make Horde Week 1 Sapphiron the hardest encounter in all of Vanilla. It is likely we will call for melee to use a Frostbot during the air phase and get this on cooldown for later in the encounter. Warriors will also pop into defensive stance during the air phase to help with damage mitigation. As Sapphiron lands from her air phase, players will need to be topped off on health. The main tank should time their cooldowns for when Sapphiron lands after an air phase, as this will give healers a bit more wiggle room to top off the raid if the tank then pops a cooldown after she lands. Sapphiron will also throw out the Drain Life Curse almost immediately after landing, so mages and druids be ready. And rinse and repeat from here. Mechanically, it isn't the most difficult encounter, but the damage is constant and resources get drained quick in the fight. Healers need to do their best to both top off the raid and conserve mana at the same time. Get your mana potions, dark runes on cooldown early. DPS needs to be quick to avoid unnecessary blizzard damage, and decursors need to be fast so Saf doesn't heal and friendly players don't take more than a tick of damage. Oh, and the tank needs to not die. If the main tank dies, it can be essentially a raid wipe. But if you can get past Sapphiron, you can kill KT, even without a full world buffed raid. The next is KT. KT has 2 phases. We will pre-pop a frost protection potion prior to the fight, and we'll pop another 1 to 2 during the encounter. Let's get into it. The first phase is an ad control phase, which isn't terribly difficult. Make sure hunters don't use or send in pets, nor use multi-shots, and don't let skellies get into the raid. It should be good. For our guild on Horde, we will have a shaman assigned to drop Earthbind totems halfway between the cubbies with the ads and the middle green circle. This will allow players more time to kill the mobs that are coming into the group. Melee will be focusing on the abominations. These can be stunned, and with the amount of melee in today's comps, they should be DPS down pretty quickly. Caster and ranged DPS should be focused on the Wailing Banshees. They move slowly, but if they get close to raiders, they do a massive knockback with frontal damage. It's no good. Healers will also DPS during phase 1, using Smite, Lightning Bolt, and Wrath to damage the skeletons. If a skeleton hits a friendly player, they do raid-wide damage that almost equates to a raid wipe. 1 skelly shouldn't cause a wipe, but if 2 hit simultaneously, it could be a wipe. Priests can shackle skellies if they get too close, but just pump out damage and don't do any attacks that aggro other mobs from the cubbies. If you do this, then a whole cubby will run towards the raid, which is also no fun. With 30 seconds or so left of the first phase, players will use their AoE fear abilities to put this on cooldown. This is relevant due to the mind control mechanic KT does in phase 2. For phase 2, all the ads in the cubbies despawn, and the remaining activated mobs need to be finished off by the raid. The tank will move into position closest to KT and be ready for him to activate. The tank will dual wield and pull KT to the middle green circle. During this phase, KT has a couple different abilities. He casts a Frostbolt, essentially all the time that needs to be kicked. Warriors and Rogues' #1 responsibility during the KT encounter is kicking Frostbolts. We will assign kick groups week 1 just to make sure players know they need a kick, and a Frostbolt should never go out. KT will periodically put a Void Fissure on the ground underneath the feet of a player in the raid. You have like 2 seconds to move out of the Void Fissure, and if you don't, it's a one-shot mechanic. As a ranged DPS or healer, this should be super easy, as ranged DPS and healers will be spread out in the room with pre-assigned spots where you will stand. If it shows under your feet, just move out of it, and then you can subsequently move back into your position after the mechanic is done. For melee who are in Zug mode, it is harder to see the Void Fissure graphic under your feet, and it is also more likely that melee will be affected as players as they're stacked together for KT. Melee will need to move backwards out of the fissure prior to moving back into damage KT. I say backwards because of a mechanic called Frost Blast. Periodically, KT will target a player and put them in an ice tomb via Frost Blast. This affects any friendly player that has proximity close to that individual. If a melee moves to the left or the right out of a Void Fissure, they can chain the Frost Blast to multiple melee groups, and this is extremely difficult to heal through. So players need to move backwards out of the Void Fissure if it's in your melee group. Frost Blast does quick damage every second the player is affected. Quick flash heals, lesser healing waves, or nature swiftness chain heals should be used to keep these players up. Healers need to target Frost Blasted affected players ASAP to make sure they don't die. As I've mentioned melee needing to move backwards, I'll also mention that we will have 3 primary melee groups, spreading out the number of melee players who could get targeted for Frost Blast. If all the melee was stacked behind the boss, when a Frost Blast hits the melee, the healers just simply would be unable to keep the players alive. Hence, you split the melee into 3 groups with tight stacks. And when I say tight, players need to be on top of each other in the stacks as to not chain the Frost Blast to other groups. Melee stacks will be at each of the KT's dress tips. There is 1 to the left, right, and 1 directly behind KT. The main tank will be in front of KT. KT also does a detonate mana on mana users. These mana users need to be not around other players, as this does damage to others, in addition to draining your mana. If there are mana users in melee range, such as an Enhancement Shaman or Ret Pally, you need to get out of melee if this targets you. KT will also do a Frostbolt volley that hits everyone in the raid. If you have lost world buffs, You could put on 2 pieces of epic frost resist gear to aid with resisting some of this damage. It will take, up to 75% of your health when it hits, and healers will then need to top off players. So, we're kicking every Frost Blast, we're moving out of Void Zone fissures, pressing backwards if you're melee, staying away from other players if you're targeted for mana burn, and healers are applying quick heals for Frost Blast targets. KT will, at some point, drop threat with a mind control mechanic. When this happens, he will always mind control the player with the most threat, and all of the off tanks will work to damage the boss and get threat. Whichever warrior or feral gets threat will move into the main tank position. It is best to drop Ignite week 1 when MCs happen, as a mage can pull threat on KT when the MCs go out. When the MCs happen, it will feel pretty chaotic. Mages need to sheep the mind control targets ASAP, warlocks will fear, rogues can blind, and if you have items like magic dust from the Dust Devils in Westfall, you could use those as well. Whatever it takes to control the MC players. Once MCs are done, sheeps will need to be dispelled. It is pure RNG how many times a raid will get the mind control mechanic. You could get it 3 times, you could just get it 1 time. At 40%, KT will call on adds that need to be tanked and shackled. Priest will look to shackle an add that spawns, and 1 to 2 off tanks will go and pick up the adds. They will make a beeline towards healers, so having something like a feral to charge and taunt is always great. You cannot shackle all of the adds, because if you do CC all of the adds, then all the shackles will break. So you can shackle all the adds -1. That is good to do. From here, it's rinse and repeat until KT is dead. The fight feels very chaotic. Mind controls can be messy, you need to move out of harmful void zones, each frostbolt needs to be kicked. There's a lot of responsibility that players need to execute on, but it's all very doable, and the rewards are amazing. KT loot is the juiciest loot in the game with items like Gressel, THC, King's Fall, and Hammer of the Twisting Nether. And that's all I have to say about KT. With that, this is a wrap on my Naxxramas guys for week 1. Remember that the first week is the most difficult, and things will get smoother over time as players get more practice, stronger gear, and better frost resistance. Best of luck Daybreak and all the other groups on their week 1 raid IDs, and thanks for tuning in.